Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our harness workshop today. We're thrilled to have you joining us. And for those of you, it's your first time, you're brand new to harness, welcome, welcome. A little bit about harness. Since 2016, Harness Giving has helped thousands of nonprofits organizations like yours make a difference. Our fundraising solutions have been part of life-saving efforts around the world, and we continue to develop and support new tools to help nonprofits thrive and grow. Your supporters already love what you do, and the more they feel part of your cause, the happier they are to give. With Harness, you build closer, giving relationships that lead to ongoing cash flow for your organization so you can do more. A little bit about our workshops. Our Harness workshops are free and designed to tackle nonprofits' biggest pain points that they face every single day. You all should have received an email from me this morning with an activity workbook that goes along with today's presentation, so you can check that after today's session and practice what you've learned. Our upcoming Harness Academy will be home to all of our workshops, webinars, and hold the tools needed for Harness community. That's you guys. In the meantime, if you're interested in this topic or similar topics, just head to blogs.harnessgiving.com, where you'll find a range of content designed to empower nonprofits like you to better steward your donors. Okay, now that we got the formalities out of the way, it's nice to meet you guys. My name is Simonne. I am Director of Marketing here at Harness and your host today from sunny Tampa, Florida. I'm joined by Zach, who will be behind the scenes ready to answer your questions that you may have. Go ahead and ask those in the chat at any time. In today's webinar, we're going to be exploring how to turn donor data into a secret weapon. But before we get into our topic and introduce our speaker, let's do some introductions and go over housekeeping. Use the chat to introduce yourself, tell us where you're listening in from, your organization, and what about this topic brought you here today. Okay, while we get some introductions, I'll go over the housekeeping slide. Please use the Q&A to ask questions. We'll have time for a live Q&A at the end. Comment and use emojis in the chat because we love engagement. We want to know that you're loving the presentation or a point being made. Please be respectful in chat because we're all here on the same mission. And if you're just now logging in, go ahead and introduce yourself, drop your name and organization in the chat to kick us off, and let us know where you're tuning in from. Okay, now join me in welcoming our data management expert, Austin Pierce, principal of Hairpin Consulting. Austin has been in the nonprofit sector for over 14 years. He has worked nonprofits large and small in various capacities, including fundraising, marketing, data management, executive leadership, advocacy, and nonprofit consulting. He's passionate about designing measurable fundraising and data strategies for nonprofits that help them influence the world for good. When he's not assisting nonprofits to grow their impact, Austin can be found cycling or playing with his 1-year-old golden doodle, Daisy. And we did add a photo so you can see how precious she is. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Austin to the stage. Austin, welcome. We're so glad you're here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simonne. Yeah, I'm going to probably be having a dog sniffing at my door this entire meeting. I've already heard her a couple times doing that. But yeah, thank you so much. So my name is Austin Pierce. Let me share my screen here. Forgetting to do that. There we go. Is that all visible, Simonne?
It is. We see it.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. So yeah, on the surface, she read my bio there, but I'm ultimately, I'm a nonprofit fundraising consultant, but at my core, I've really become somewhat of a data nerd in a really unwilling format or method. See, throughout my career, my life, like the nonprofit sector has easily been the best sector, I think, to work in. I've played a little bit in the corporate world and digital marketing and things like that, but ultimately really did find my home in the nonprofit sector. And so not long after kind of coming back from the corporate world into nonprofit fundraising, I found myself looking around this industry and questioning, kind of asking myself, hey, how do we know that anything useful is getting done in this sector? I see, new nonprofits opening every single day. They're competing for other donor dollars. They're competing against the for-profit world to try and really try to influence the world. But the question for me became, are these nonprofits really helping meet the needs in the right way? And so I realize that's cynical, and there's always, we all have seen the news articles and stuff that come out about nonprofits that are doing, bad work and things like that. But I know that the word right, if they're doing the work right, that's a relative term. But this is kind of how I thought at the time, is it was a relatively cynical approach, frankly. at the time when I was thinking through this, I was working in a nonprofit for adults and kids with developmental disabilities. And so as the fundraiser for the organization, I'd get to tell all these fun stories of our inspiring stories of our individuals who had leveraged their disabilities, to find great jobs, learn different life skills, and just generally gain more independence in their life. But then I would look at the mass of our population, and I would sometimes ask myself, and guiltily ask this, is do we know that this is really working? Each person in our program was completely different. They had different needs, they had different disabilities, and so how did I know that we could confidently say that we were taking that right approach as it related to this community of people? Just to paint this picture was, for some members, learning to tie their shoes is a breakthrough. Yet for a different person, finding an apartment or a new job, that was a breakthrough for them. And so this success wasn't necessarily an apples to apples comparison. And so it made me think and really kind of frustratedly ask my CEO of, hey, we've got to measure this differently. And that's funny, right? That I'm the one questioning the data, which these are the very questions that nonprofit funders, grantors would come and ask me about the work that I'm representing. And here I am turning internally and asking the same question. So it was a peculiar spot to be in for me. But at the time, I was a 20-something in this field. I really started to look at how nonprofits measured their work. I started to see, data for some organizations that was absolutely stunning, that they really were affecting change in the world. And then I would look at others that really couldn't show their work was meaningful at all. And that was frustrating at times, right? They may have been doing great work, but they couldn't show it to save their life. And so this was really conflicting to me. So as this fundraiser, who normally I care about the story and everything that we can tell around our work, I suddenly became this fundraiser who was neurotic about data. I did not want this. In my view, and I'm going to get flack for this, I'm sure, is data people were nerds in my view. And I didn't really enjoy talking with those people. And then here I am now, I'm one of those people that I don't enjoy talking to. So ultimately, this was my fate. And I've just kind of learned to accept that this is going to be my niche and my place in the nonprofit sector. And so it didn't take too long for me in that pursuit to really see that, programmatic data is very interesting. You all deal with it every day, I'm sure. But I could actually learn that I could use this data to actually work for my work in fundraising. And so suddenly, data wasn't just this resource for me to communicate success. It was it was the resource that would allow me to help this nonprofit survive. And so from that point on, it's really been more of this personal mission for me to value data above all else in my fundraising career. For better or for worse, I'm the guy who wants to see the numbers. And that makes people roll their eyes when I go into meetings and into my, back when I was working on staff at organizations and not consulting. All the leadership team would groan when I'd come into the room because I'd be asking, well, how do we know that's working? Or do we have any data to prove that this is what's happening and stuff? So there's a ton that I've learned in fundraising and about how fundraising data can be used. And there really is, there's so much for every single organization. I can promise you that, placing value on how you collect data and how you manage data, just like you would place value on your organization's money, it will pay off drastically for you in the end. But that doesn't necessarily change the fact that this discussion of data is oftentimes daunting or it's boring. It's really easy to look at this type of conversation and say, hey, we don't have a good enough donor management system, or we don't have enough staff to do this, or we don't have really the money to invest in donor data strategy. And so while all of that might be true, there are truly things that you can do today, I believe, for free that will put you on the right path towards at least a somewhat better data strategy, or towards something that would help bring on your leadership team to understanding the value and importance of this data. But before I jump in, we have a poll that we're going to throw up here for you. And this was, and I hope this was a scale of 1 to 5, Simonne. Actually, I just realized this, I don't think we even talked about that. But the question we wanted to ask you all, or poll we wanted to ask you, was how well do you feel like your organization prioritizes data in your decision making? It's completely confidential. You can be as blunt as you need on that. And then we asked this other question down here as well that you have, which is, do you segment your donors? And we'll come back to those results later on that side. I'll give you all a couple seconds there, but as you're answering that, we'll cover three main things today. I just want to highlight this, kind of where we're headed. And the first is I want to really discuss the biggest mistakes that I see nonprofits make with their data. Then we'll kind of go through and we'll talk about how you can use this data to find excess fundraising capacity, which I think I saw that question asked a couple times in your pre-questions that you all had sent. And then from that, we're going to talk about how you can acquire all new donors based on the data that you've collected on your existing donors. And so to jump in, and do we have results? We've got results. Perfect. Which this is exactly what I expected to see, and I'm so relieved that I was able to predict this. But this is super common for people to say, hang out in that under 3 range with regard to how well you're using donor data, or data, period, in decision making. And so it really is, tracking data, managing data. It's a bit of a change in traditional thinking. I'm the millennial, so I feel like somewhat of an advantage when I come to this table, because I grew up in the world of big data in some form. But many older organizations, or even just organizations that are a bit less sophisticated, they oftentimes don't view their data as a resource like money. They try to recognize it as something that's kind of secondary importance. And so I just really would advocate and say that data in and of itself is a currency, and it's a resource that can be managed with the same importance that your money is. And so with that, we'll jump right in. I panic when I do these webinars because I hate when they promise something and then I'm terrified as a speaker I'm going to forget to cover it. So in this case, the very first thing I just wanted to hit it was these top 3 mistakes that nonprofits make with their donor data. The very first one to jump in here is you are collecting too little or too much data. And when I was writing my notes, the other thing I would have added to this, or the wrong kind of data. With clients that I've worked with, as well as past organizations that I've been on staff with, this is a common mistake that even I have fallen victim to at times. For example, in this situation, we assume that since a donor gave money to us, they should be copied on every single e-blast that our organization sends out to them. Rather than, we fail to ask them, hey, what are your communication preferences? Because we don't want to spam you and annoy you. I'm seeing a question there. Sorry about that. Or we decide on tracking a bunch of different variables as an organization in our database. All of these that seemed really great initially, but the truth was that we didn't really put the foresight or the thought to make sure that we had the staff or the time to keep managing these data fields or these pieces of data. And so then our data ends up becoming stagnant, or we don't keep it updated, it's unused, all sorts of kind of issues with that. And so it's another, just again, a kind of an example of too much data collection. Or the last one, and this is the worst one that I had to bring up, was I see many organizations ask their donors on like a online giving forum is, how did you hear about us? And they're asking that question every single time someone processes a donation to that page, which is on the surface extremely valuable. However, if you think a little bit deeper into it, it's not hard to see how this tends to risk spoiling the actual information which you're trying to get, which is the real question that's asking. It's not just how did you hear about us, but we want to know how our new donors were hearing about us. And so when you get old donors flowing in on that data point, you're really just bloating your answers. You're collecting all this awesome data that is functionally not useful to you because it told you nothing. If there's one donor who comes in and says TV every single time, we have no information on our new donors. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, kind of how to resolve something like that. But number 2 to this was that you aren't looking at the data that you already have, let alone using it to make decisions, which again, I'm so glad the poll looks the way it did, because that's exactly what we're trying to say here. And I alluded to this in the last section, but we choose all sorts of things that we'd like to track, but then we fail to actually use the data in our daily work. We fail to act on it. We might be tracking our donors' giving patterns, but are we making sure that we're not soliciting this one time per year donor 7 different times in our direct mail, rather than sending them, a cultivation piece or an impact report instead throughout the year? Or are you using lower giving amounts, on your donation forms? And so you have a $100 donor who would have given $100, but you accidentally had $10 listed on the button. or on the form for them, and you really end up missing out on excess revenue. And the truth is of this, and this can sound complex, it can sound not complex, but the truth is that every single one of the organizations on this call, you all have way more data than you realize. If you have a CRM of any sort, or a spreadsheet, for goodness sake, even if you have that, you can detect a ton of information. You have, you're tracking gifts. You've got donors giving information and they're giving patterns. But even more basic than that, you typically have a zip code or a street address. So you can actually find out what their home is possibly worth. There's so many data points that we have that we just tend to not look at because we're so overwhelmed, or we just simply don't really know what to do with the data, and so we just avoid it altogether. I'm guilty of that at times. That's not like a non-data person issue. There's times I'm like, I just don't want to see what that's going to tell me. And so that takes easily into this third one, which is you just don't prioritize data collection or data management. And so I bring this one up as more of a gut check to any of you nonprofit fundraisers, you executive directors on the call. Again, data is a resource. It's a resource just like money, like staffing, like supplies. Data really needs to be valued throughout an entire organization. And so you're all here to learn how you can improve your fundraising data, but we tend to get so focused on fundraising that we forget to prioritize the outcomes in our programs, or we forget to prioritize employee retention data or markers of our employee culture, or process efficiency metrics, all those sorts of things. And ultimately, I just wanted to say, donors tend to catch on to this. When reviewing a data that an organization makes public, specifically like program outcomes and things like that, it's not hard to see who's doing the work well and who isn't. And I get it. Data management's daunting. We're not always sure what this data is going to do for us. If you're an executive director, sometimes it can be scary. It can be boring. You might even be afraid of what the data is going to do for you. The data might hold you more accountable to your job, which is always tough. And so that's why when I say I believe that when an organization prioritizes data, ultimately it's prioritizing accountability, because data, for better or for worse, tends to hold us accountable for what we're doing. So one thing we're going to do today, and I'm trying to think through how different this is. It maybe not be, but really the question I think is what is something that you can do right now to improve this data? And so throughout the webinar today, I'm going to be sharing a bunch of different action tasks that you can do today to help with your data strategy. I watch a lot of webinars, just like most of you, and they contain really good information, but sometimes it's inspiring or hypothetical, but ultimately there's not much I can do with it. And so I just wanted to provide some things that you all can take action with. And so this very first one, and this is probably the easiest one, is to just start collecting, or at least think about collecting, one meaningful data point. And so this can be as complex or as simple as you'd like. You can add a quick question on your donor form that asks, hey, what motivated you to give right now? Or the one I actually love is, what other causes do you support? And so, and I can dig a little bit more into that later, but the caution you with this one is, don't choose just a random data point. Your goal here is to have a reason or a purpose behind the data point that you're choosing. And a good test, I always think, for this is to go to whoever your leadership team is, your development committee, whoever that is. It should make logical sense to those people why the data point matters and what action that you're going to take as a result of collecting this. And literally, I was preparing this presentation and was wrapping up some things on it yesterday, and the same exact day I had a client tell me, and this happens all the time, they tell me, hey, it would be really nice to see X, and X being whatever a data point is. It'd be really nice to see, how many of our donors live in this zip code, or how many of our donors give in this giving range, and things like that. And it's always a good thing, right? But I typically respond and very quickly ask them, like, hey, awesome, that's great that you want to see that. What are you going to do with it? And that's oftentimes the point which, the room goes silent, or they don't really have a great answer, or other people in the room start throwing answers around the room, hoping that this person will, hoping that they can make sense or justify this data point. And so I just say that to caution you. to make sure that you have a plan to use whatever data you're collecting. Don't ever collect it because it would be nice to see, because ultimately that data then will go unused, or worse, you will rely too much on something that you didn't think through enough and make bad decisions as a result of the data. So in the chat here, I want to see if we can get you all somewhat engaged here. I want to see if you all can tell me, are there data points, what data points could be valuable for you to collect on your donors that you aren't currently collecting? Or if you can't answer that as easily, what other data points have you been collecting that seem very useful that other organizations may not have found useful? If you can throw just a couple of those in the chat, there's no bad answers in this whatsoever. I've seen some wild data points get collected in organizations. And so let's wait for you. I'll wait for your thoughts there, some thoughts there.
Austin, do you have some examples that we can?
I do, yeah. A big one. Perfect. That's literally the example I was going to give, was a donor birthday. You know, so many people are hesitant to give up their birth date, but if they do provide it to you, one, you get this awesome touch point to wish them happy birthday each year. Anniversary date is another great one. And then the second thing you get is with the birthday is that you can actually get insight into their age and some general demographic details based on them, which helps you in a lot of other things in your data. Again, it's a tough one, I feel like, to get donors to give their birthday, but when they do, it's extremely valuable. An anniversary date, I think that's a fantastic one. If you're trying to celebrate, hey, a year ago you gave X amount, that's fantastic. And I always personally love when organizations reach out to me with that, because it tells me that they're watching, they know what I'm doing and giving. Yes, program affinity area, absolutely. Knowing exactly what piece of your work they care about. They may not have a care for one part of your organization, but they may love this other piece that you're doing. And so completely agree. Thank you for those. That's actually awesome. And program affinity area is not an example I thought of, so that's fantastic. The best thing of this, so you've chosen a data point to collect, but the most interesting aspect of these types of discussions is when this data can actually result in more money. In fundraising, this is what we hope data does, right? We hope that we can use the information we have on our donors to bring in more money. But what if that money was already there, and you really just couldn't see it? And so this is where we kind of want to dig into excess fundraising capacity in a donor database. And this is probably the thing I'm going to harp on most in this call, because I can almost guarantee that every single organization sitting on this call has excess capacity sitting somewhere in the book. You may not have found it, or you may know where it's at and not be pursuing it, and that's a whole different problem. I get it. I've been there. But if you're looking around your database, just the first thing to consider when you're looking for this excess capacity is to really know what you're looking for. You may be choosing to look for people in your database who give to other nonprofits in your local area or nationally that are similar to your organization. And so then you can find out, hey, they could be actually giving more to us. Or, you're looking at donors like you have a birth date. You're looking for donors who are at some older stage in life and that you can target in a planned giving effort. Or even down to, you're just looking for people who are high net worth households in your database, but they're only giving $25, which I can't count the amount of times that I've had that happen, where a very wealthy donor drops in a quick test donation of $25 to see how we're going to handle it, and then 6 months later a $25,000 gift comes in because they were happy with what we had done, or they tell us, hey, I didn't like how you handled that, and I'm not going to give you the money. So this stuff matters. This type of capacity matters, and so this data doesn't have to be hard to find in your database. If you have a huge database or even just a small spreadsheet, I guarantee you there's capacity. For smaller nonprofits, and I've done this many times when I was early on in fundraising, was hopping into Zillow and just slamming in street addresses to see values or estimated values of my donors' homes. And while it's not this perfect measure of someone's net worth, it's what I had at the time. And it acted sometimes as this quick indicator that, this person could give way more than they had currently been giving. And boom, instantly there's capacity to be found. And then I'm gonna touch on this for just a second. It's not every nonprofit can do it, but if you find that you're lacking in any real actionable data in your database, Another option is to just append data to your database. Data is more accessible than ever in this day and age. And so if you have a sizable database, adding things like an age or careers, net worth, any sorts of other variables, that can really save you a lot of legwork in finding that capacity and deciding who to pursue for more support or who to cultivate. And frankly, for those of you who haven't done this, I will tell you, buying data is becoming less expensive every single day. That is terrifying to me as a consumer, but it's wonderful to me as a fundraiser and as a data consultant. And so definitely want to just point out that that is a possibility. However, every single time I tell that to organizations, I get somebody who says, hey, we're too small or we don't have the money to do something like that. And I completely understand that. Buying data may not be in your budget. It may not make sense for your work, or you may have just an ethical issue about it. And that's entirely okay. And so if that's the case for you and your organization, it just may not be in the cards. And so the best way that I can advise to get around this and find excess capacity is a really simple, annoying thing I'm going to tell you, which is to get to know your donors. Start with your largest supporters, work your way down the list, start scheduling coffees, lunches, dinners, Zoom calls, whatever it is, invite them to events. Because as you get those interactions, as you interact more with those donors, and you get the few that will actually take you up on a coffee, a Zoom call, those sorts of things, you're going to have way more data than you ever could have appended to your database. And so I just to caveat, when you're small enough, this chance to see, all 50 of your supporters is an absolute blessing. It's not a curse. I think it's actually better. Buying data is easy, but it isn't always perfectly accurate. And more importantly, you still got to get to know that donor no matter what. And so you're really just saving yourself a step somewhat there. And honestly, as you get to know these donors, you're going to find the excess capacity. You won't need to buy data. You'll just have to buy a coffee or a lunch for somebody. And then the third way that I kind of want to throw at you is to find this capacity is really simple. It's just asking for more. And I always say this, kind of grow your own gift. A common method I use through direct mail, and I'll throw this slide up here, was on the left here, was we would often provide these boxes at the bottom of our, with our receipt slips for donations at the bottom of a direct mail piece. And so originally, and early on in my career, I was using just static numbers, 25, 50, 100, and leave it at that. Or we have a tax credit here in Arizona, so we put tax credit values in there. But as I got more in tune with our donors, we actually started to utilize the donor's average gift. And we would take that average gift and we would put it in the leftmost column. So that $50 is their average, the donor's average gift. And then in that middle, as you can see, we would put a 10% increase in a little bit larger box using some consumer psychology there. And then on the far right box, we'd put 20%. And it didn't take even one mailer for us to figure out that our donors were choosing the middle and even more importantly, the rightmost boxes because it made them feel better ultimately. And this was crazy because it really didn't take any effort on our part other than to utilize a piece of information we had, which is sum it up and divide it by the amount of their gifts, you have an average gift. And so ultimately, now we're cultivating our donors, we're increasing their gift, and they're not even realizing that we're doing it. Oh, it's worth mentioning, I put this point in, it's worth mentioning that in this example, donors who gave over $1,000, so their average gift was over $1,000, we didn't ever want to put thousands in those lines. And so another way we did this is what we put just a custom gift line. It was just one single line, but right above it, we put the small message. I didn't have an example of it for this, but we put the small message that says, we're so grateful for your support previously of X amount of dollars last time. And so it still signals to the donor, hey, we know who you are, and we know what the right amount is to be asking you for. And the best part for me, it wasn't data I had to go buy. I didn't have to convince my CEO to, invest money in purchasing data. It was just existing giving history that we'd had. So I say all of that to say that whether you can afford to, buy donor data or simply just look at your current database for all you have, there is so many ways that you can learn about your donors. And the number one way to do it is to ask them. Yeah, I like that question, Simonne. So any Harness customers on the call currently doing this with their checkout form? I'll be curious to see that. So then the second action task that we have that I wanted to throw at you all was to just ask your donors what they care about. This goes back to not buying data, but getting to know the donor. In 2022, we've all been through a chaotic last couple of years, absolutely. And frankly, just the way technology has changed, we are all so getting sick of noise. We're getting sick of irrelevant information being thrown at us. Instead, if anything, we would welcome a message that actually matters. In this era of big data, phones are watching everything we do. It's almost shocking when someone just asks you point blank, hey, what do you like? Or what do you want to hear about? Or as somebody said earlier, what part of our program matters to you most? Those things come as a surprise to people because we're kind of used to people just doing that. Oops, sorry about that. We're just kind of used to people, just inferring about us. And so sometimes it's a relief when someone gives us a choice about the data we're trying to share with them. Ask your donors about what are their communication preferences. Do they prefer text messaging over emails or calls? Asking how someone wants to be communicated with is a really big way to win trust with them. But it also just makes sure that, you could be completely missing this mark on knowing what your donors care about, right? Or how they want to be talked to. And sometimes you just have to ask those couple questions and speak, and then you can ultimately speak to these ways, speak to your supporters in ways that end up resulting in so much more money for the mission. A few years back, and this is a story to this point, was I had worked for a food bank, a local food bank here, and when I was working there, we actually acquired a food rescue nonprofit. When we acquired them, the decision was made that we were going to keep that organization having its own branding and its own message because we felt the brand was strong enough to support itself. And so in charge of fundraising for both orgs now at the time, I started digging into this food rescue nonprofit. And I saw that their marketing talked all over about feeding people. And that's a noble cause, right? Like it's a very standard cause for a food bank. And for a food rescue organization, it's relatively similar. But I brought it up. I said, hey, isn't this marketing the exact same thing that we do as the food bank? And it almost felt like that they were repackaging what our food bank did. And so it didn't make sense to me, either let's merge these messages into one message, or let's dig a little bit deeper and see, what we can do here with the food rescue messaging. And so what we did actually, we sent out this annual donor survey, and we asked all of the donors, hey, what do you care about? What about our mission matters to you most? And this was a mission that has one program. So it wasn't like they could say, oh, we care about kids or we care about this, but it was, we just really wanted to know what about a food rescue nonprofit mattered to them. And so what we found, and it was so fast that we discovered this, was that most of the donors who gave to this food rescue nonprofit, they cared way more about the environmental impacts. And they cared a little bit less about exactly where the food was going, which, mind you, was to different human services organizations, homelessness, food pantries, all these places. And of course, we thought they'd care about all these wonderful homelessness organizations that we could have given the rescue food to. But the truth was they actually just wanted to know more about, hey, what kind of emissions am I cutting out of the environment? CO2 emissions, or how much of this food is being diverted from the landfill, or not as much about where the food was going. They just wanted to be confident that it wasn't going to waste. And so, tailoring our language to be greener in nature, it was bound to capture their hearts way more than talking about all of the people in need that they were feeding. And all we had to do to find this out was to just say, hey, what do you care about? And so I say that to just say, ask your donors what matters to them. Once you have this better idea of who's in your database, and when you've begun to get to know supporters and start to see the themes in your database, you're going to very, very quickly see specific groups of people that care about your cause more than others, and you can start to target them accordingly. And so while some may still care about who's being fed, others want to know about the environmental impact. And so once you know what that type of donor or donors support, which type of donor supports you currently, you're in this really good position to find the new support, which takes us to how to acquire new donors based on all of this other information that we're discussing. And so I'll flat out say, finding new donors based on your current donors. Having done the previous things that we've discussed, it really is more just about using the data you have at that point. Once you've prioritized the data, you've dug into this information that you have at your fingertips, and you've done all the legwork that it takes to get to know your supporters, not just data collection, but the relationship building piece too. You end up with the easiest task, which is to find more people like the ones who give a lot to you now. And so using this data you have about your supporters, you can begin to start crafting targeted marketing messages. You can start saying yes to showing up to the right events and no to the events that aren't going to help your nonprofit. You can target the right social media segments, and honestly, at the end of it all, you can really acquire the more of the ideal type of donor that you're looking for. And I don't say ideal to negate, obviously, any smaller giving or even really the mid-level giving donors that you have. Those are very much essential people groups that you're working to cultivate. But when I say ideal, I'm talking about the people that are going to come in and make substantial impacts to your ability to sustain this mission and ultimately sustain yourself financially. Oftentimes, acquiring new donors is, and I've got a couple of new nonprofit clients that I work with now, acquiring donors is really hard for them because nonprofits, they typically don't know who their ideal donor is. And so, again, when you've decided what data you're collecting and learning why they give, it makes knowing who is likely to support you in the future so much more clear. And that takes you to this very straightforward action task. And I will point out this one is probably the most time-consuming one, but also probably the most valuable as well. And Simonne actually just noted this about Canva. So this is part of what we'll get into with your workbook that you've been provided. Knowing who your ideal donor is, it really sets you up for the most success possible. This is kind of marketing 101 in a sense, but nonprofits tend to not use it. But from there, when you know who your donor is, you can start targeting people with even down to just a one sentence variable in your donor solicitation, that speaks to the people group you're targeting. Like if it's an acquisition campaign or you're sending out mail to donors who've never given to you before, but that you're targeting parents. Well, this mailer happens to be going out in August. Show them that you know who they are with just a one sentence at the top that says, hey, back to school is here. Help kids do X, Y, and Z. This ultimately increases the likelihood that they're going to want to learn more about you because the message matters to them. A senior citizen may not care about the school seasons as much because they don't have kids in school, but their version of that very same mailer could say, hey, the grandkids are headed back to school. Something, again, indicates that we know who they are, that this could matter to them. And it's a really subtle change. It's a really subtle difference, and it doesn't seem like that much, but it ultimately can mean the difference between someone reading it and making a gift, giving you their information, or just tossing what you've sent them. And so I just want to kind of implore all of you, begin making efforts to understand your donors and segment them so that you can see the type of donor that responds well and the ones that don't. So this leads me to the workbook. In your workbook, we provided this persona tool. And there's a bunch of persona tools out there. So if you love this one, great. If there's other ones you prefer, absolutely, that's fine. But you can use this to better understand who your ideal donors are. It walks you through kind of this process of making you think about various aspects and characteristics of the people that are giving to your organization. And then ultimately you get to target them differently. If 20-something environmentalists love your work, but you only seem to be getting gifts from retired couples, you now have these two personas that you can realize this from. And so from here, you can decide, do you change up your marketing to better draw in more of those 20-somethings, or do you make the choice to, hey, we're going to embrace the retired couples or the retiree segment and see if we can't get more support from them. And so I just would highly encourage you to walk through this persona tool. If you're a fundraiser in your organization, I've done this before, and it really can impress and reassure your development committee, your board, your leadership team. It'll really help them understand that what's happening in your department, in your organization. And ultimately, it can help you craft a message and a marketing calendar that you can almost empirically prove to people. And so you can ultimately bring better funding to your mission. And so, Simonne, can you pull up the results to the poll again, because I just had this question of, do you segment your donors? I didn't include that slide in here, but so I love saying, okay, so it's almost 50-50. It's looking a little bit like in terms of who segments, who does not segment their donors. And so that's great. Actually, I'm happy for the ones that are segmenting. That is fantastic. The thing I will probably say to every nonprofit, you could probably segment more. There's always more you could segment. That's kind of a never-ending effort, but I get it there. So just to conclude, every one of our organizations is different. I know that. Economies in your area are different. Giving patterns are different. And then most importantly, your missions are all different. And so, the things we've discussed today, these are really simple steps you can take to raise more money. I'll tell you that, improving data practices, it will undoubtedly help you reach more donors. And it ultimately help more of the world with the mission that you're working with. I had a CEO, and I say this, is that the for-profit world is light years ahead of this, of nonprofits when it comes to their data strategy. I had a former boss who he went and spoke at a conference and came back and told me what he said, but he reminded the audience, and I'll say this here too, is that we are not nonprofits competing with other nonprofits for dollars. We're actually competing with for-profit companies, who are getting to spend more and more each day, who are trying to get you to spend more and more each day. Companies like Amazon, Target, Walmart, they all know who their target customers are. Not only do they know how to do this, but they actually take it a step further into prescriptive analytics, is what it's called, to get really nerdy. But they actually know how that they can influence your demand for their products. So it's kind of terrifying. We've got these companies that can discreetly make us need something that we don't even want or aren't even looking for. But they can only do this successfully because they've got good data on you. And so I just caution you to say, the nonprofit world, they're getting more aggressive about this. It's time for the nonprofit world to get more aggressive as well, because the work that we're doing, I tend to believe, is making a bigger impact in the world. That's a personal belief, of course, but just wanted to point that out as well. And so if you're sitting there asking yourself, hey, how do we better use our data, or what other data could we be collecting? I'd love to speak with you and see if Hairpin can help. We're a nonprofit consulting practice that specializes specifically in this sort of data-driven decision-making. And so we help tons of organizations with fundraising methods, but we also help them with all sorts of non-fundraising related process improvement, data collection and analysis processes, and other nerdy things like that. Having been a former nonprofit leader and fundraiser, I kind of know that nonprofits are limited in what they can do from a financial standpoint sometimes and stuff. So just don't let that be a barrier to reaching out. Let's have a conversation and see if we'd be a good fit. I think that's all I have. I appreciate all of your time today, and I'd love to just open it up to any general questions that we have. I'm going to try to pull chat open here. And Simonne, do you want to take back share, or am I good here?
Yeah, we can take it back over, but that was super informative. I know we learned some things over here as well. Thank you so much, Austin. We can take questions in the chat, but we also have the Q&A. So either one, whatever's easier, go ahead and use the chat to ask questions. In case we don't get any right away, we do have some that came in during registration, so I can start with some of those if that's okay with everyone. And if that's okay with you, Austin.
Absolutely.
We have Russell from Waldo County YMCA. He says, how can we harness the value of the data we have? What else do we need to collect? And I know you shared a lot, so maybe there's a few other high-level examples that you can share with everyone.
Yeah, it completely varies. Looking at like a YMCA, for instance, the data you're collecting would be totally different than a food bank could collect or something. Mm-hmm. But it really, I think, comes down to identifying, using gift data. I think if you have people who've given to your organization, do not hesitate to use the gift data that's at your hands or at your fingertips to, try to craft a message. Again, do something like those average gift pieces. These are all really small changes that you can test, and they don't cost you much more in the work that you're doing. You're not buying any data, anything like that. Oh my God, I missed a Ted Lasso gift. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's what I would say to someone in that situation. And again, happy to talk individually more about that as well, as it relates to very specific organizational needs as well.
Great. And I know you talked a little bit about segmenting, so I think this next question kind of goes into that. Jessica from Chrysalis, continuing to learn how data can be used to enhance storytelling. So I think that's a really interesting question, how they can use the data that they are collecting to better enhance their storytelling. Do you have any examples on how that can be applied?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I've always wanted when I'm working in fundraising is I love, and someone mentioned this before, was knowing which part of the program area that they talk about. You can segment your donors by program area. Knowing that in your solicitations, you can send them direct information about your kids' programs, your seniors' programs, your, whatever the population that you're serving is. It allows you, again, to give a message that matters to somebody and not an irrelevant message, or kind of like we talked about in that food rescue example, right? Nonprofits who, they're talking all about, hey, you're feeding people, and the people are saying, we don't really care about that. We just want to know about the environmental impact of what we're doing. And so, there's a billion ways you can segment. You can always segment more. A lot of us segment, into like our lie bunts and side bunts and those sorts of segments. But the more specific you get, the more targeted you get, I can almost guarantee you the more response you will see from those people. So that's definitely a thing to think about when you're doing that. Awesome. I love what Chrysalis does, by the way. Very familiar.
Oh, cool. Okay, I have a few more here. So Rebecca from United Way of Henry County and Martinsville, she says, what are some free integrations that can help us organize our harness database? So this is a harness specific, but I'm sure your answer will be helpful across. She says her organization currently uses one each for their website and Constant Contact for mailings. What are some tips and tricks to expedite our process and maximize, I think she meant, our digital engagement?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things with just hearing Constant Contact and kind of email, United Way, I'm assuming y'all are familiar with this. Just I don't know how large that United Way is specifically, but drip marketing, I think, is one of the most fascinating things that has been accessible to the nonprofit world now that it's been around in the for-profit sector for a long time, but it's becoming much more user-friendly for us. So, and when I say drip marketing, by the way, that's you receive an email, whether you click a specific button or based on which button you click determines the next email you're going to get in a few days. Or if you don't click something, you're going to get a different email. I'm sure you all have received something like an abandoned shopping cart email where you were shopping for something and they're sending you an email. You never even gave them your email, but they email you and say, hey, is this the product you were looking for? And so those sorts of things we can customize more than ever with technology to really, again, not waste messaging on people. And Simonne, I don't know if you're able to speak at all to specifically harness integrations on those sides, but yeah, very.
Yeah, we have a list. So what I can do is follow up by email with just helpful links, because depends on exactly what they want to use them for. We have a bunch of options. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. But yeah, Constant Contact, even hearing that is like, okay, you're on the right track, right? I mean, that's already a really powerful tool with what you're doing. And so you don't have to spend a ton of new integrations, a ton of new pieces into your CRMs and stuff.
Great. And the last question that I have, again, if anybody in the audience has any questions, now is the time to ask. So I have Philip from Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia. He says all options and resources for data extraction / analytics on the platform and relevant use cases for growth / this is a loaded question, Austin. Relevant use cases for growth / retention among mid-level 2,000 to 4,000 donor base.
So, okay, so loaded. So what's the question here exactly? Now I'm missing it.
So it looks like they're asking about like data extraction and analytics for like 2,000 to 4,000 number contact donor base.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So if the question's about tools, there's a billion. Even systems, bigger systems like Tableau and those sorts of things are awesome for analyzing data. But I just like to mention, honestly, of even a mid-level giving segment. That's an area I have focused heavily on. Major giving, I always say, I'm like, nobody wants to hear from a millennial about major giving, which I say that jokingly, of course, but I focused heavily on our mid-level segments. And so almost everything I'm discussing here today is around those groups of people, right, that we can cultivate into future donors. there's tons of methods and ways that you can go about it. But analyzing that data and really just starting to track, okay, did we get this mid-level donor from, point A to point B? Did we get a 10% increase, a 5% increase? But really knowing who those segments are, that's where your segments matter, I think, is attracting more of those mid-level people. I'm probably answering that like really vaguely and indirectly because it's a tough question, but yeah, I hope that's helpful.
That might be a good follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, it looks like those are all the questions that we have
Awesome.
for today's session. So I want to thank you, Austin, and thank you everyone who joined us today. I know that you shared briefly, and I did add it to the workbook, but Austin, what's the best way for our audience to get a hold of you if they have more?
Yeah, let's just say through my website, hairpinconsulting.com. You can email me. My email is hello@hairpinconsulting.com, so that's the easier one. But yeah, through my website, absolutely. And thanks for throwing that down there.
Yeah, the Zoom doesn't hyperlink, but if you copy paste, that will work.
It lets you.
Okay, perfect. So, Zach, if we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So I'll wrap it up a little bit with some harness. And so if anyone here would like to explore what goes into building sustainable nonprofit success stories, scan the QR code on your screen to schedule a quick 15-minute call with our team. Little snippet. So by simplifying your everyday task, our fundraising, marketing, and stewardship solutions give you more time to focus on what really matters, which we talked about all today, your donors. And because we understand that your organization's needs may vary from month to month, our pay-as-you-go subscription model allows you to pick the solutions that best fit. So you're never locked into any long-term contracts that don't work for you. So if you're interested and just want to talk to our team, go ahead and scan that QR code. We can go to the next slide. And again, if any questions come in, Austin's still here. We'll forward any questions over or contact us, go to his website. But that does conclude our presentation today. But I do have one last favor to ask. If you can take the survey, we take that feedback, not personally, but we take every feedback and we're using that to improve our webinars every month. Check out our website. We do have webinars every single month, and we actually have some, if you go to the website, it's info.harnessgiving.com/webinars. You'll see all of the upcoming, and this recording I will send out to everybody, hopefully by end of today, tomorrow the latest, but the recording will also be on the webinar library. So thank you so much. That concludes our meeting today. Thank you, Zach, for sharing that link. Copy paste it, check it out, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.